Hello, students. This is Alan Gilmore, and we are moving into Modular 4 of our Human Services 20 class. This modular corresponds with the chapter in the textbook and focuses on diversity and social justice. We're going to take 3 different videos to be able to get through this presentation. So this is video number 1. As we typically do, let's go ahead and start with some definitions of social and economic justice. Social justice is defined as the effort to create the opportunity for the full participation of all groups in a society. Ideally, a society should be designed and intended to meet all the needs of all individuals and guarantees that all its members have human rights and equal access to benefits and resources. So again, if you look at the beginning of this definition, it's talking about an effort. It's not saying that everything is in place and we have social justice, but that we as a society are continuing to make the effort to create a more just society. And we do that by creating opportunities for people to fully participate in all aspects of our society. So in terms of access to school, access to resources, access to housing, access to jobs, all of those are the things that we're talking about in terms of full participation. We should be designed and intended to meet all the needs of all individuals. So that is taking into consideration all individuals, no matter what race, gender, ethnicity, physical handicaps, sexual orientation, sexual gender identity, all of those come into play, and that all members have human rights and equal access to benefits and resources. So then taking a look at economic justice, this is a sort of a subpart of our social justice definition. It's incorporated into all of our social justice work because economic justice is, again, a set of principles for building structures within an economy with the ultimate goal of creating opportunities for each person to create a sufficient income in order to have a dignified, productive, and creative life. So you've probably maybe heard the term living wage, the idea that anybody who is working in a job, particularly if they're working full-time, is being provided with compensation that allows them to be able to pay for housing and food and healthcare and to be able to live a quality life. So that's what we're talking about in terms of economic justice. And that economic justice is also about opportunity, which means that we ideally are not seeing people experiencing discrimination in terms of employment, that no matter your ethnicity, no matter your gender, if you have the skill sets and the ability to be able to do a job, you should be equally considered for employment, irregardless of those ethnicity or gender or sexual orientation or gender orientation issues that may come into play. So one of the questions that social workers are always asking, and one that we probably are asking maybe a little bit more of these days than maybe in the past, is what is it that gets in the way of a society being able to operate in a way that provides full inclusion and access to all of its citizens? So I by no means have an answer to that particular question at this given time. It's complicated and confusing. It has to do with our history and the way our country came together and the way that we've operated in the past. And but we have to acknowledge the fact that there's been progress that's been made, that we are a different country than we were 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But are we perfect? Is everything the way that it should be in terms of social and economic justice? Obviously not. So that just tells us that we have more work to do and more ways to figure out how to make a more social and more just country of ourselves. Continuing with some definitions of terms. These are probably terms that you've heard before. And I think the key that I want you to get out of this is I really want you to understand the definition, and then I want you to understand the relationship between the concepts. So the first one that we're going to take a look at is what's referred to as prejudice. And this is a preconceived judgment formed without adequate information, an unfavorable opinion or feeling formed beforehand or without knowledge, thought, or reason. And then discrimination is actions that maintain and support prejudice and deny members of minority groups equal access to opportunities such as education, housing, and employment. So I think you can begin to see where the two concepts begin to sort of intersect with each other. I think the critical piece about the concept of prejudice is that it's preconceived. So it's based on assumptions that you may have based on either your prior experience, what you've seen in the media, what you've heard from your families, that these kinds of people are this kind of way. And if the way that you perceive people seems contrary to the way that you operate, then it obviously is going to result in discrimination. So again, preconceived judgment, you don't have adequate information, it's an unfavorable opinion, and then you take that opinion and you utilize it as a way of being able to discriminate against a particular individual. Some additional considerations: social inequality, which occurs when resources, employment, schooling, housing in a society are distributed unevenly because socially defined categories of people, either based on gender, race, national origin, are used when making determinations resulting in prejudice and discrimination. So this is where we see the lack of opportunities to be able to access things like housing, schooling, employment has a direct relationship to prejudice and discrimination. Some additional considerations: the term oppression, unjust use of power against a non-dominant group by the dominant group to exploit these groups to its advantage. So if you're talking about something like race, then you might be talking about the difference between white privilege and either African Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, and that those populations are put at a disadvantage because they are not the dominant group. Populations at risk, this is a term that's quite frequently used in social work, and it's really a sort of a catchphrase for being able to identify in any given situation a particular group or population that might be experiencing prejudice, discrimination, or oppression. And then stereotypes. These are the beliefs that members of certain groups behave in specific ways. We always want to acknowledge individuality in terms of people. And even though people may come from the same ethnic group or the same community, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are similar or alike in any particular way. There's kind of humorous ways that we can think about stereotypes. When I would teach this class, I would ask, in person, I would ask the students, what's a stereotype that you've heard? People would say things like, all Asians are good at math. Well, that's a stereotype. We know that there are people who are good at math that are not Asian. We know there are Asians who are not good at math. It's these ideas that just because it's something that gets talked about in popular culture or popular media, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And then we want to talk about institutional discrimination, which occurs as a result of accepted beliefs and behaviors and is institutionalized, which means that it's established in practice or custom. So examples of institutional discrimination include things like laws or court decisions. There was the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson US Supreme Court case, which ruled in favor of separate but equal public facilities between African Americans and non-African Americans. So this is where we saw the beginning of things like white only and black only facilities and accommodations. And for some of you, this may be kind of a new understanding or a new idea, but we as a country at one point in the beginning of this century would see black water fountains and white water fountains, black bathrooms and white bathrooms. There was even this concept of black hotels and white hotels. And so that's separate but equal, although most likely not always equal, public facilities between African Americans and non-African Americans existed for a long time in our country. Another example of institutional discrimination might be a law enforcement agency that arrests more minority citizens than criminal activity dictates. That would be another form of institutional discrimination. A local housing administrator that prevents people from certain ethnic groups or races to buy homes is another example. For a number of years in our country, there was a practice called redlining, where you literally would create barriers and obstacles for people of color to be able to purchase homes in neighborhoods that had been determined to be non-minority neighborhoods. And that's how we found ourselves with large cities that have sort of a part of the city where maybe all people of one ethnicity or race reside. And that was a practice that went on for years and years and years as well. And the final example is an organization that regularly promotes men, but promotional opportunities for women doesn't happen. That's another version of institutional discrimination. So we're going to pause there and give you some time to take a look at that. And when we move into the next video, we'll begin a conversation about social and economic justice for women.